That summer morning in San Diego felt strangely off, a kind of quiet that made the air feel tense rather than peaceful. Emily Miller, dressed in her familiar red gown, stood still at the gate of her cliffside mansion. In her open palm, light as a breath, lay Hope, the tiny German shepherd so small she fit completely beneath a single finger. Her little body trembled, yet her eyes were sharp, almost knowing, as if she could see a truth Emily had not yet grasped. Then suddenly, the microchip scanner on Emily's wrist let out a piercing beep. Not a medical alert, but an encrypted signal, the kind no one expects to hear on an ordinary morning. Hope lifted her miniature paw and placed it against Emily's wrist, as if urging her, "Don't run anymore. It's time to know the truth." Emily drew a deep breath, looking at the creature smaller than a miracle. And when she finally spoke her first words, the entire mansion seemed to freeze in place. If this story moves your heart, don't forget to follow our journey. The heat came early to San Diego that day, the kind of dry, shimmering summer heat that made the sidewalks breathe and the air itself feel like glass. The sky was a ruthless, polished blue, not a single cloud in sight to soften the sun's glare. Even the palm trees along the boulevard seemed tired, their fronds barely stirring in the faint ocean breeze that couldn't quite reach this part of the city. Cars crawled along the street, their metal bodies gleaming too bright, and the distant wail of a siren faded as quickly as it rose, swallowed by the hard stillness of the morning. It was the kind of day that looked perfect on a postcard and felt wrong in real life. Emily Miller stepped out of the back seat of her black luxury sedan, one heel at a time, the click of her stilettos sharp against the sun-baked pavement. She was in her early 30s, tall and poised, with the effortless grace of someone used to being watched. Her dark brown hair, smooth and straight, fell just past her shoulders, framing a face that would have looked soft, if not for the faint tension at the corners of her mouth. Her skin carried a light golden tan from too many days of business trips and rooftop meetings, and her eyes, hazel with flecks of green, held the distant, calculating look of a woman who spent more time reading numbers than people. She wore her signature red dress, a tailored piece that hugged her slim figure and fell to just above her knees, paired with a designer bag that cost more than most people's cars. To the world, she was a successful investor, a self-made millionaire who had climbed her way up from nothing. To herself, she was just someone who had never quite found a place that felt like home, even inside the walls of her own mansion. She had just left a tense meeting at a nearby cafe, where two men in suits had smiled too quickly and lied too smoothly about risk exposure and market volatility. Emily had smiled back, her voice cool and unshakable as she dismantled their proposal piece by piece. She won, of course. She always did. But as she walked away, the victory felt hollow. Her bank accounts were overflowing. Her name carried weight in boardrooms across the city. Yet there was a small, unoccupied silence somewhere in her chest that no deal, no mansion, no luxury car had managed to touch. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and started down the sidewalk, planning to circle around the block to clear her head before heading back home. That was when she heard it. At first, it was so faint she almost dismissed it as a squeaky fan inside the cafe or a distant bird complaining in the heat. A high-pitched sound, thin and trembling, came from somewhere to her right. Emily stopped. The sound faded. She frowned, glancing around. The street in front of her was normal. A couple walking hand in hand, a cyclist moving past with earphones in, a delivery truck idling at the curb. Nothing unusual. She was about to move on when the sound came again. this time a little sharper, like a tiny plea being dragged across concrete. It was coming from the narrow alley beside the coffee shop. The alley slumped between the cafe and a small grocery store, a slice of shadow wedged into sunlit storefronts. The concrete there looked darker, stained by time, lined with dumpsters and stacked cardboard. Heat radiated from the ground, and the air smelled faintly of old fruit and spilled coffee. Emily hesitated at the entrance, feeling a strange prickle at the back of her neck. This wasn't the sort of place a woman in a red designer dress usually stepped into. Normally, she'd call someone, security, an assistant, anyone, to deal with whatever it was. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and something inside her shifted. Curiosity, maybe, or something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Concern without profit. She took a careful step into the alley, her heels clicking more softly now. The shadows swallowed her shape as she moved between the dumpsters, the temperature dropping just a fraction. "Hello?" she called out, her voice steady but quiet. No answer. Only the distant buzz of traffic and the soft hum of the cafe's air conditioning units. She scanned the ground, her sharp eyes tracing over discarded receipts, a crushed soda can, a torn cardboard box. Then she heard it again, almost directly at her feet this time. A tiny, broken whimper. Emily crouched down, careful not to let her dress brush against anything too dirty, and reached for a small stack of flattened cardboard propped against the wall. Her fingers were steady, but her heart had started to pick up speed for reasons she couldn't explain. She lifted the top layer and moved it aside. Her breath caught. Nestled against the hot concrete, half hidden by a scrap of paper, was the smallest living creature she had ever seen. At first, her mind refused to make sense of it. It looked like a miniature sculpture, perfectly crafted and impossibly detailed. A German shepherd puppy, complete with the familiar black and tan coloring, the pointed little ears, the long muzzle, except everything was wrong. It was tiny. Not just small like a newborn, but impossibly, terrifyingly tiny, its entire body barely the length of her thumb. Its fur was slightly damp, clinging to its delicate frame, and its sides rose and fell in fast, uneven breaths. The head was proportionately large for its little body, and the paws, no bigger than grains of popcorn, twitched weakly as it tried to shift its weight. Its eyes opened, and that was what broke her. They were shockingly clear, a deep, glossy brown that shone with an intensity too big for such a small body. Those eyes locked onto hers, with a look that wasn't wild or feral. It was pleading. The tiny mouth opened, releasing another choked sound that might have been a cry, might have been a desperate attempt to call for a mother that never came. Emily felt something twist sharp and sudden behind her ribs. This was not a stray she could shrug off. This wasn't even a normal puppy. This was a living impossibility. Fragile, trembling, and utterly alone on a slab of concrete in the middle of an uncaring city. Very slowly, as though any sudden movement might shatter the little creature, Emily slid one hand closer. Her fingers were slender, manicured, tipped with red polish that matched her dress. By comparison, the puppy looked like a toy someone had shrunk in the wash. It reacted to her presence with a tiny flinch. Then, to her astonishment, it dragged itself forward the smallest fraction and lifted its front paws. Those paws, so small they barely covered the lines in her skin, reached out and clung to the side of her index finger, hugging it with all the strength it had left. The touch was feather light, but Emily felt it as if someone had grabbed her by the heart. She had said it 100 times in 100 different contexts. I don't need anyone. She didn't need partners who lied. Didn't need family who had left long ago. Didn't need friends who only came around when the champagne was cold and the parties were loud. But here, in a shadowed alley that smelled like old coffee and sun-baked cardboard, a creature smaller than her thumb clung to her finger as if she were the only thing standing between it and the end of the world. And for the first time in a very long time, Emily realized that her words had never been less true. "Hey," she whispered, her voice softer than she remembered it could be. "Easy, little one. I've got you." Carefully, she slid her hand underneath the puppy's tiny body, feeling its fragile weight settle into her palm. It was even lighter than it looked, like holding a piece of warm air. Up close, she could see how precarious its life was, the faint outline of ribs under thin fur, the way its chest fluttered and stuttered with each breath. The heat of the concrete had seeped into it, leaving it overheated and exhausted. The puppy whimpered once more, then tried to curl closer into the hollow of her palm, as if burrowing into a shelter it had been searching for all along. For a moment, the alley, the city, the whole world seemed to narrow down to the circle of her hand. Emily's mind flickered through a dozen practical thoughts. This wasn't sanitary. She didn't know how to care for something this small. She had calls to make, deals to close. All of them crashed and fell away when the puppy's minuscule paw patted weakly against her skin, then went limp. Its tiny body, already so still, seemed to sag even further, and the thin, rapid breaths turned shallow. The eyes that had been so desperately bright a moment ago fluttered, the gaze unfocusing. Panic slammed into her with a force that surprised her. "No," she breathed, her composure cracking. "No, no, no, not now." The air suddenly felt too hot, too heavy, like the whole city was pressing down on this one fragile life in her hand. She rose quickly, almost stumbling in her heels as she backed out of the alley, cradling the tiny German shepherd against her chest, as if her heartbeat alone could keep it going. The sunlight outside seemed harsher now, the street too loud, too slow. The black sedan was still waiting at the curb, engine purring. The driver, a man in his 40s with a neat haircut and a calm, professional demeanor, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. He was used to seeing her composed, untouchable, a woman whose schedule dictated everyone else's speed. Today, he saw something different in her eyes. Fear. Without bothering to smooth her dress or adjust her hair, Emily yanked the back door open and slid inside, still cupping the trembling life in her palm. She leaned forward urgently, her voice breaking in a way he had never heard before as she shouted, "To the nearest vet clinic! Drive as fast as you can!" The car swerved through the late morning traffic of San Diego, sunlight flickering across the windshield as Emily pressed her palm over the tiny German shepherd curled within it. The sedan's air-conditioned coolness did little to tame the anxious heat rising in her chest. Hope, no bigger than a thumb, lay frighteningly still, her breaths faint and staggered. The driver, Mark Evans, a man in his mid-40s with a square jaw and a faint trace of gray at his temples, kept glancing at the rearview mirror. Normally stoic and almost overly proper, Mark had spent years working for wealthy clients who treated chauffeurs like shadows. Emily had never spoken to him beyond polite instructions, but now he saw something raw in her eyes, something human beneath the polished exterior. He tightened his grip on the wheel, speeding slightly. The small seaside veterinary clinic came into view, an older white and blue building squeezed between a surf shop and a taco stand. Its faded sign, Harbor View Animal Care, swung gently in the breeze. It wasn't the kind of place wealthy clients usually visited. It was modest, aging, and staffed by people who worked more for love than for money. But it was the closest. Emily didn't care about prestige. She cared about the creature trembling in her hand. Mark jumped out first, opening the door for her. As Emily stepped out, hair glinting chestnut under the sun and red dress catching the wind, she looked almost out of place, like someone who had accidentally wandered out of a magazine spread into a gritty summer morning. She rushed inside, heels clacking, breath shallow. The waiting room went silent the moment she entered. A young woman holding a tabby cat paused mid-conversation. An older man with a spotted Dalmatian blinked, puzzled. Behind the counter, the receptionist froze. Her name tag read Lily Carter, a petite woman in her late 20s with pale skin, strawberry blonde hair tied in a messy bun, freckles scattered across her nose, and warm green eyes that reflected too much empathy for her own emotional good. Normally chipper and chatty, Lily found herself speechless as Emily approached, cradling what looked like a toy. "I need help," Emily said, voice sharp but trembling. Her hand opened slightly, just enough for everyone to see the minuscule rise and fall of Hope's chest. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Lily gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. That's a puppy?" Before Emily could answer, the exam room door swung open. Dr. Harris, a man in his early 50s with graying hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and deep-set eyes shaped by years of worry and long shifts, stepped out removing a pair of latex gloves. His face bore the tired calm of someone who had seen too many emergencies and too many endings, but also enough miracles to keep showing up. His shoulders were slightly stooped, a posture left over from a back injury during his early days volunteering at wildlife rescues, one of the many things that made him both resilient and weary. He started to greet Lily, but froze mid-stride when he saw Emily's outstretched hand. He stepped closer slowly, as if afraid the tiny being might vanish if he moved too fast. "Bring her here," he murmured, and his voice, usually steady, clinical, softened to something reverential. Inside the exam room, he cleared a small space on the stainless steel table. Emily placed Hope down with a delicacy she didn't know she had. The puppy lay on the towel like a fragile speck of life stitched together by sheer will. Dr. Harris leaned in, adjusting his glasses. "I've treated newborn pups, but never one this small," he muttered. Like a sculptor studying a masterpiece, he reached for his stethoscope with hands that, despite decades of surgeries and emergencies, trembled faintly now. He touched the chest piece gently to Hope's minuscule ribcage. The room went silent. Even Emily held her breath. Then came the sound. A heartbeat so rapid, so faint, so stubborn, it almost didn't sound real. Dr. Harris pulled the stethoscope away slowly, blinking hard. His lips pressed into a thin line as though emotion threatened to escape. "This shouldn't be possible," he whispered. "Not at this size." He lifted one gloved finger, letting it rest near Hope's tiny paws. To everyone's shock, Hope stirred, barely, her front leg struggling forward until it touched the vet's glove. The gesture was so small, it could have been mistaken for a twitch. But the intent in it, the plea, was unmistakable. Lily sniffed behind them, covering her mouth again. The Dalmatian owner in the doorway leaned in, eyes wide. Even Mark, standing quietly near the wall, swallowed hard. Dr. Harris exhaled shakily, emotion breaking through his usual composure. "Look at her. She's begging us not to give up." Emily's throat tightened. She'd heard negotiations worth millions crumble without batting an eye. But this tiny creature clawing for life, unraveled her. "So what do we do?" she asked quietly. Dr. Harris removed his gloves, rubbing his forehead. "What we do depends on you," he said, meeting her gaze. His eyes, normally tired but dry, now glistened with a sheen of tears he didn't bother hiding. "I can try everything I know. I can build her a chance, but it will require round-the-clock care, feeding every hour, warming pads, monitoring." He hesitated, voice dropping lower. "And even then, there are no guarantees. This is beyond rare, beyond fragile." Emily felt her pulse thrum in her ears. Hope let out a faint whimper, as if sensing the conversation. Dr. Harris straightened, jaw tightening with conviction. "I'll give her every tool she needs. But you must decide. Stay awake for her, fight with her." His voice wavered. "Or we let her go peacefully now." Emily's hands curled into trembling fists. The puppy's breathing hitched, her eyes fluttering, weakly. The decision weighed between them like a living thing. The chapter ends before she speaks. Emily carried Hope out of the clinic, as if she were carrying the last surviving ember of a dying fire. The sun outside was harsher now, the kind of scorching San Diego summer brightness that made everything look too sharp, too exposed. She shielded Hope with her hand until she reached the car. Mark, the chauffeur, did not speak. He simply opened the door and softened his usually stern gaze, understanding without words that something fragile was unfolding in the back seat. The drive home was quiet except for Emily's whisper-thin breaths and Hope's faint, uneven ones. Emily's mansion sat on a coastal cliff overlooking the wide sweep of the Pacific, a modern structure of glass and pale stone that shimmered under the afternoon sun. It was beautiful, impressive, and impossibly empty, a quiet monument to her success and loneliness. As she pushed open the tall front doors, the cold air inside brushed over her skin like a reminder of how silent her life had become. Today, that silence felt heavier than ever. Inside, she moved quickly, but with a kind of reverence. A woman used to handling million-dollar contracts, suddenly terrified of dropping something that weighed almost nothing. She changed out of her dress into a deep red silk robe, soft enough not to scratch Hope's delicate fur. In her walk-in kitchen, lined with chrome appliances and marble counters, she rummaged through cupboards with an urgency she had never applied to anything non-financial. She found a small saucepan, milk, and the old medical dropper Dr. Harris had given her. Her hands shook as she warmed the milk. Emily Miller, whose signature never trembled on a contract, now fumbled like someone learning how to hold a pencil for the first time. She placed Hope in a shoebox lined with one of her softest red scarves, adding a small, heated pad beneath. The pad glowed lightly, radiating a gentle warmth. Hope stirred, a flicker of movement so small Emily almost missed it. She leaned close, brushing Hope's head with the edge of her finger. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm here." The first feeding was clumsy. Hope's mouth barely found the drop of milk at the tip of the dropper. Her tongue, no bigger than a grain of rice, flicked slowly at the warm liquid. Emily exhaled in relief, though her eyes were already burning from exhaustion. That was the beginning of her new life, one ruled by timers and tiny breaths. Every 2 hours, day and night, the alarm on her phone buzzed. Emily would jolt awake, hair tangled, eyes swollen, robe half falling from her shoulder as she scrambled toward the small, red-lined box on her coffee table. She always feared she would send Hope still and cold. But each time, Hope moved, weakly but undeniably alive. Emily would smile, despite the bruise-colored circles under her eyes, despite the ache in her back from sleeping on the edge of her sofa. In the daylight, the mansion transformed. The rooms, once filled with polished surfaces and curated, emptiness now echoed with the soft rhythm of Hope's existence. Emily kept the curtains half drawn to avoid bright sunlight overwhelming the fragile pup. She chose the living room as their base camp, arranging everything she needed: milk, clean cloths, a thermometer, the tiny box, and a stack of medical notes from Dr. Harris. Once, around noon, while she rested her cheek on the table beside Hope's box, she heard it. A sound like a hiccup mixed with a squeak. Hope was trying to bark. Emily blinked, then laughed softly. "Really? You think you're a guard dog already?" Hope puffed out another tiny sound, earnest and determined. Her eyes, despite being half-lidded with exhaustion, held a seriousness that made Emily's chest tighten. It was absurd, a dog smaller than a thumb trying to show bravery, but also heartbreakingly beautiful. As days blurred into nights, Emily stopped answering calls. She canceled meetings. She let emails pile up. Sarah Collins, her personal assistant, dropped by one afternoon after failing to reach her for 2 days. Sarah was a tall, wiry woman in her early 40s, with curly black hair streaked with silver, sharp cheekbones, and a habit of speaking fast, as if she were always trying to outrun her own to-do list. She stepped inside the mansion with her usual stride, ready to lecture Emily about responsibilities. But when she saw the tiny creature in the scarf-lined box, her whole posture softened. "Oh, my God," she whispered. Her voice, usually brisk and businesslike, turned gentle as she crouched beside Emily. "Emily, she's so small." "Too small," Emily murmured. Sarah stayed only a few minutes, sensing Emily's fierce protectiveness. She left quietly, promising to handle the week's obligations and telling Emily to call if she needed supplies. Even she, hardened by years of executive chaos, looked shaken as she closed the door behind her. The nights were the worst. The mansion was too quiet. The waves outside too distant. Emily would pace slowly around the living room, Hope pressed against her chest for warmth. Sometimes Hope's breathing grew so faint Emily feared it had stopped. Then a tiny twitch, a sigh, a flicker of life would return. But on a night heavy with the thick coastal air of late summer, something changed. It was 3:07 a.m. Emily hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a time for days. Her vision blurred as she reached into Hope's box to check on her. She touched Hope gently. The pup didn't move, didn't twitch, didn't breathe. Her stomach dropped. "Hope?" Emily whispered. No answer. She touched Hope again. Nothing. Panic thundered through her as she lifted the little body into her palm. Hope lay limp, eyes closed, fur too still. Emily's own breath shattered. "No! No, please!" Her voice cracked. She pressed Hope to her chest, clutching her like something stolen from death. Tears slipped down her cheeks and fell onto the tiny German shepherd's unmoving fur. And the chapter ends on her desperate, whispered question. "Have I already lost her?" Emily sat frozen on the edge of the sofa, Hope's limp body cupped against her heart, as if sheer willpower could drag life back into that thumb-sized chest. Her tears slipped down her cheeks, falling onto Hope's still fur, each drop warm, heavy, carrying the kind of fear she hadn't felt since childhood. For several long seconds, the world felt suspended, the quiet of her mansion pressing down like a weight. Then it happened. A tiny sound, soft, sudden, almost comedic in its timing, escaped Hope's mouth. A tiny hic, or maybe a sneeze. A flinch rolled through the puppy's microscopic frame, followed by a trembling stretch of her legs. Emily gasped, a laugh, raw and wet, breaking from her throat. It was ridiculous the way despair and relief collided inside her, leaving her breathless. She pressed her forehead to her trembling hands, whispering, "You scared me half to death, little warrior." Hope shifted weakly, her eyelids fluttering open just enough to reveal the glossy brown beneath. It was a familiar look, fragile yet stubborn, as though she refused to leave, refused to give up. From that moment on, Hope's recovery felt like watching dawn break 1 minute at a time. Emily stayed close day after day, moving with care, scheduling her entire life around Hope's fragile needs. The mansion that had once echoed with impersonal silence now buzzed with a peculiar kind of warmth. Hope tried to stand more often, wobbling like a newborn fawn, her legs quivering under her minuscule weight. Sometimes she lifted her head proudly, mimicking the alert stance of full-sized German shepherds. Emily found herself grinning each time, shaking her head at the absurdity of a tiny warrior guarding a multi-million-dollar living room. Word spread through the coastal neighborhood. It started innocently, through Sarah's slip of the tongue in a grocery store line, then through the delivery driver who'd glimpsed the little creature curled in Emily's palm. Soon the story had a life of its own. Neighbors knocked on the door, unsure if they were disturbing a celebrity or approaching an urban myth. One of the first to visit was Mrs. Henderson, a retired schoolteacher in her 70s with short silver hair, a soft, round figure, and floral dresses that smelled faintly of laundry soap. She was known in the neighborhood as a quiet widow who baked cookies she rarely ate and collected ceramic angels she never displayed. She gasped when she saw Hope, pressing a hand to her chest. "Heavens," she whispered, "I've taught hundreds of children who gave up easier than this little one." Her watery smile made Emily's throat tighten. Then came Jonah, a lanky 15-year-old boy with messy black hair, freckles, and a skateboard tucked under one arm. He was known for getting into trouble around the pier, though his mischief rarely turned serious. When he saw Hope, he let out a stunned laugh. "She looks like an action figure that came to life," he said, eyes wide with admiration. Hope, perhaps recognizing a young spirit, responded with a tiny tail wiggle. Jonah nearly screamed. Kids giggled on Emily's front lawn, pointing at Hope perched proudly on Emily's palm like a mythical creature claiming her territory. Even adults, usually too busy or too polite, found themselves stepping inside her home to glimpse the miracle puppy. Emily, who had lived behind emotional walls for years, found herself opening the mansion's doors again and again. And strange as it felt, she didn't mind. But recovering didn't mean safe. One afternoon, while Emily rested on the sofa, Hope dancing delicately on her palm, the puppy suddenly shuddered. Her tiny legs buckled, sending her collapsing into Emily's hand. Emily felt the drop in strength instantly, a chilling echo of the night she'd thought Hope was gone. "Hope?" she whispered, panic rising like a tide. Hope twitched, a faint whimper slipping out. Before Emily could react further, the doorbell rang. The timing felt wrong, too sharp, slicing through the fragile atmosphere in the room. Heart pounding, still clutching Hope, Emily hurried to the front door. Standing there was a man she had never seen before. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit too perfectly, the kind tailored for someone who wanted to command attention without raising their voice. His hair was dark blonde, combed with an almost rigid precision, and he had a neatly trimmed beard lining a chiseled jaw. His eyes, cool blue, sharp, calculating, locked onto the movement in Emily's hands instantly. In one hand he held a polished leather briefcase. "I apologize for the unannounced visit, Ms. Miller," he said, voice smooth as glass. Up close, Emily noticed something unsettling. Though he stood with the polite posture of a corporate representative, there was a coldness behind his expression, a rehearsed charm that didn't touch his eyes. The kind of man, she thought, who had made too many decisions without considering the cost to anyone else. "I'm Nathan Cole," he continued, extending a card she didn't take. "I represent Genesis Pet Research Laboratories." Emily stiffened, instinct flaring. She didn't know the name, but everything about him, from the immaculate suit to the calculating stare, felt wrong in her doorway. "What do you want?" she asked, clutching Hope closer. Nathan's gaze didn't waver. "I've been informed that you are currently in possession of a specimen matching a very specific genetic profile." Emily's grip tightened protectively. "Specimen?" Nathan's jaw tensed. "The miniature German shepherd you're holding. It fits the description of an experimental runt believed to have been lost during a transport accident. That dog." He took a slow step forward, expression darkening with certainty. "Does not belong here with you." Hope whimpered, as if understanding. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. Nathan's final words dropped like a blade. "She belongs in our laboratory." And the chapter ends on that cold declaration. Emily sat frozen on the edge of the sofa, Hope's limp body cupped against her heart, as if sheer willpower could drag life back into that thumb-sized chest. Her tears slipped down her cheeks, falling onto Hope's still fur, each drop warm, heavy, carrying the kind of fear she hadn't felt since childhood. For several long seconds, the world felt suspended, the quiet of her mansion pressing down like a weight. Then it happened. A tiny sound, soft, sudden, almost comedic in its timing, escaped Hope's mouth. A tiny hic, or maybe a sneeze. A flinch rolled through the puppy's microscopic frame, followed by a trembling stretch of her legs. Emily gasped, a laugh, raw and wet, breaking from her throat. It was ridiculous the way despair and relief collided inside her, leaving her breathless. She pressed her forehead to her trembling hands, whispering, "You scared me half to death, little warrior." Hope shifted weakly, her eyelids fluttering open just enough to reveal the glossy brown beneath. It was a familiar look, fragile yet stubborn, as though she refused to leave, refused to give up. From that moment on, Hope's recovery felt like watching dawn break 1 minute at a time. Emily stayed close day after day, moving with care, scheduling her entire life around Hope's fragile needs. The mansion that had once echoed with impersonal silence now buzzed with a peculiar kind of warmth. Hope tried to stand more often, wobbling like a newborn fawn, her legs quivering under her minuscule weight. Sometimes she lifted her head proudly, mimicking the alert stance of full-sized German shepherds. Emily found herself grinning each time, shaking her head at the absurdity of a tiny warrior guarding a multi-million-dollar living room. Word spread through the coastal neighborhood. It started innocently, through Sarah's slip of the tongue in a grocery store line, then through the delivery driver who'd glimpsed the little creature curled in Emily's palm. Soon, the story had a life of its own. Neighbors knocked on the door, unsure if they were disturbing a celebrity or approaching an urban myth. One of the first to visit was Mrs. Henderson, a retired school teacher in her 70s with short silver hair, a soft round figure, and floral dresses that smelled faintly of laundry soap. She was known in the neighborhood as a quiet widow who baked cookies she rarely ate and collected ceramic angels she never displayed. She gasped when she saw Hope, pressing a hand to her chest. "Heavens," she whispered, "I've taught hundreds of children who gave up easier than this little one." Her watery smile made Emily's throat tighten. Then came Jonah, a lanky 15-year-old boy with messy black hair, freckles, and a skateboard tucked under one arm. He was known for getting into trouble around the pier, though. His mischief rarely turned serious. When he saw Hope, he let out a stunned laugh. "She looks like an action figure that came to life," he said, eyes wide with admiration. Hope, perhaps recognizing a young spirit, responded with a tiny tail wiggle. Jonah nearly screamed. Kids giggled on Emily's front lawn, pointing at Hope perched proudly on Emily's palm like a mythical creature claiming her territory. Even adults, usually too busy or too polite, found themselves stepping inside her home to glimpse the miracle puppy. Emily, who had lived behind emotional walls for years, found herself opening the mansion's doors again and again. And strange as it felt, she didn't mind. But recovering didn't mean safe. One afternoon, while Emily rested on the sofa, Hope dancing delicately on her palm, the puppy suddenly shuddered. Her tiny legs buckled, sending her collapsing into Emily's hand. Emily felt the drop in strength instantly, a chilling echo of the night she'd thought Hope was gone. "Hope?" she whispered, panic rising like a tide. Hope twitched, a faint whimper slipping out. Before Emily could react further, the doorbell rang. The timing felt wrong, too sharp, slicing through the fragile atmosphere in the room. Heart pounding, still clutching Hope, Emily hurried to the front door. Standing there was a man she had never seen before. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit too perfectly, the kind tailored for someone who wanted to command attention without raising their voice. His hair was dark blonde, combed with an almost rigid precision, and he had a neatly trimmed beard lining a chiseled jaw. His eyes, cool blue, sharp, calculating, locked onto the movement in Emily's hands instantly. In one hand he held a polished leather briefcase. "I apologize for the unannounced visit, Ms. Miller," he said, voice smooth as glass. Up close, Emily noticed something unsettling. Though he stood with the polite posture of a corporate representative, there was a coldness behind his expression, a rehearsed charm that didn't touch his eyes. The kind of man, she thought, who had made too many decisions without considering the cost to anyone else. "I'm Nathan Cole," he continued, extending a card she didn't take. "I represent Genesis Pet Research Laboratories." Emily stiffened, instinct flaring. She didn't know the name, but everything about him, from the immaculate suit to the calculating stare, felt wrong in her doorway. "What do you want?" she asked, clutching Hope closer. Nathan's gaze didn't waver. "I've been informed that you are currently in possession of a specimen matching a very specific genetic profile." Emily's grip tightened protectively. "Specimen?" Nathan's jaw tensed. "The miniature German shepherd you're holding. It fits the description of an experimental runt believed to have been lost during a transport accident. That dog." He took a slow step forward, expression darkening with certainty. "Does not belong here with you." Hope whimpered, as if understanding. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. Nathan's final words dropped like a blade. She belongs in our laboratory. And the chapter ends on that cold declaration. Nathan Cole stood in the doorway, like a shadow cutting across the sunlight, spilling into Emily's foyer. His posture was crisp, the shoulders squared with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. In his left hand he carried a thick leather briefcase. In his right, a manila folder brimming with documents. Emily, clutching hope close to her chest, felt a chill run down her spine despite the summer heat rising from the marble floors. Nathan stepped inside without waiting to be invited. "I appreciate your cooperation," he said, his voice smooth but edged like polished steel. Up close, Emily noticed more details. The faint crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, not signs of kindness but of perpetual scrutiny. The slight scar above his right eyebrow, pale and straight, likely from a long-ago accident or fight. It made his otherwise immaculate appearance feel colder, sharper. He placed the briefcase on her glass coffee table and opened it mechanically. "Our laboratory has invested heavily in genetic microline research. The dog in your possession represents a breakthrough we believed we had lost." His fingers tapped the folder. "We're prepared to offer compensation for your cooperation." He slid a contract across the table. Emily didn't sit. She didn't speak. She simply watched as hope, barely the size of a fig, curled herself into the hollow of Emily's palm, paws gripping faintly at the lifeline etched into her skin. Nathan continued, unaware or unconcerned as to the effect his words were having. "This proposal includes financial settlement, confidentiality agreements, and ownership transfer." He gave her a business smile, the kind that had been practiced in too many boardrooms. "You'll find the amount more than generous." Emily lifted the first page. Lines of sterile legal jargon blurred in front of her, but one sentence, clear, chilling, stabbed through. "The laboratory does not guarantee the subject's survival under experimental conditions." Emily's stomach twisted. Experimental. Subject. Survival not guaranteed. Hope shifted, emitting a faint chirping sound. Her version of a whimper, pressing her entire body weight, impossibly small yet impossibly present, against Emily's thumb, as if tucking herself closer for protection. Emily set the contract down. "You're asking me to hand her over knowing she might die." Nathan clasped his hands behind his back. "Progress has costs, Ms. Miller. We're working for the future of veterinary genetics. Your cooperation would be invaluable." Emily stared at him. "She's not an experiment." "That," Nathan replied with a faint tilt of his head, "is your emotional projection speaking." His lips curved slightly. Understandable, but unscientific. The dismissiveness ignited something inside her. Memories flashed, hope trembling in the alley, hope's tiny paws clutching her finger, the sleepless nights, the breathless terror, the miraculous recovery. The weight of those moments grounded her in a way no amount of money or power ever had. Emily picked up the contract again. Nathan's eyes glinted triumphantly, already anticipating her signature. She tore the document in half. The rip echoed louder than any shouted argument. Nathan stiffened, disbelief flickering across his face. "Ms. Miller," she tore it again, and again. The pieces fluttered onto the glass table like falling feathers. "You aren't taking her," Emily said quietly, voice steady as stone. "Not now. Not ever." Nathan inhaled sharply, the veneer of politeness cracking at the edges. I would caution you to reconsider. There are legal channels. Use them, Emily said. I'll still win. The tension in the room coiled tight. Finally, Nathan snapped the briefcase shut with a metallic click. Very well, he said. But remember, you've chosen difficulty over cooperation. He turned sharply, stepping out the door with the cold precision of a man calculating his next move. The moment he left, Emily locked the door, pressing her forehead against it, breathing deeply. Hope wriggled gently in her palm, as if sensing the storm had passed. Emily kissed the tiny top of her head. You're safe, she whispered. I promise. The next weeks passed with a calmer rhythm. Emily took Hope back to the clinic for a full assessment. Dr. Harris, eyeglasses smudged, gray beard slightly longer than before, examined Hope with awe. Still tiny, he murmured, but healthier than I ever imagined. His eyes softened. You've done something remarkable, Emily. News spread far beyond the neighborhood this time. Social media erupted with photos of the thumb-sized shepherd, comments flooding in from people who found comfort, wonder, or courage in Hope's existence. Journalists wrote articles calling her a living miracle. Emily, once a woman surrounded by wealth but untouched by sentiment, found herself smiling more, genuine smiles that reached her eyes. One late summer afternoon, sunlight slanted golden across her balcony, the ocean below humming with gentle waves. Emily sat in a cushioned chair, wearing her flowing red dress, warm wind brushing her hair. Hope perched proudly on her shoulder like a tiny sentinel, chest puffed, tail flicking with heroic bravado. You're so small, Emily murmured, and somehow you've taught me more than the whole world ever managed. Hope let out a miniature bark, high-pitched but full of fire, thumping her tail against Emily's collarbone. A promise, a challenge, a declaration. Emily laughed softly. As the sun dipped, she gazed at the city beyond her cliffside home, its lights flickering to life like stars scattered on earth. She felt hope curl into her palm, tiny body warm and steady. And for the first time in her life, Emily felt the world shift into its rightful place. If something so small could fight so fiercely to live, then no dream, no matter how fragile, was ever too small to chase. Hope sighed, settling deeper. Emily closed her hand gently around her, holding the entire miracle of her new life in her palm. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive in flashes of lightning or grand revelations. Sometimes, they come in the smallest of forms, no larger than a thumb, wrapped in fragile fur, carried by hands that were once afraid to feel. Hope was never just a tiny German shepherd. She was a reminder that God's blessings often appear quietly, placed gently in our path when we least expect them, whispering that we are not alone, that love still finds us even when we've stopped looking. Her story teaches us what so many of us forget in the rush of everyday life, that every breath is a gift, every connection is holy, and every small act of kindness can change a destiny. If a creature so little could survive storms meant to break her, then surely we too can rise through the challenges of our lives. Surely we too are held in a greater hand, guided, protected, and loved in ways we may never fully understand. And as you finish this story, may you carry one truth in your heart. God still works in quiet ways. Miracles still walk among us. Sometimes, they sleep in the palm of our hand. If this journey touched you even just a little, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Send this story to someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another moment of grace. May God bless you, protect your family, and fill your days with miracles, big or small, seen or unseen. Amen.